Hi guys. So I'm now at 9,300 followers on TikTok, and I'm really excited with how things are going lately because I've been talking about a lot of things that interest me, and I've been finding people that I know find value in it. So it's like that's the goal, with content creation, is to find something to create content about that I enjoy that others can also benefit from, right? And so I've seen my following grow faster than it ever has in the whole 3 years that I've been doing TikTok. And so with that has come from me posting a lot of neurodivergent content. So today I was thinking what I want to talk about. And I was like, I want to talk about how I've been working through shame that comes with being neurodivergent, because I've also noticed a lot of people in my comments talking about how they're having a hard time coming to terms with their diagnosis, and does it ever get better, and just having a hard time processing it and accepting it. And of course that's kind of a process that sometimes can be up and down, but I can remember points in my process where I was it was really hard for me to accept, and then I can see the steps that I took to get to the point where I am now, where I am a lot more accepting of myself and more understanding of my symptoms, rather than what's the word? It's I've learned to understand and embrace it rather than reject it and feel shame around it. So I was like, maybe I can help out by talking about it. So I have my Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood mug. It's got honey chamomile tea in it. Usually I have a coffee, but it's a little bit later than I intended to film. It's 7 p.m. So anyways, okay, so I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was 21. That was about 3 years ago for me. How old am I about to be? That was a little over 3 years ago for me. And so when I first got diagnosed, my first thought was oh my God, I'm not crazy. Everything that I've been feeling has been so valid. I'm not just, because basically every time I felt like I showed a symptom of ADHD, I was very forgetful, with everything. I would forget to turn the oven off, which could be dangerous, I would forget to lock the doors, I would forget to put things away, I would forget when homework was due, I would be a little bit late on assignments sometimes, I would a lot of times I would end up doing them the morning before, but luckily, I would recognize it on the bus, on the way to school, and I had enough time, and it was in elementary school it wasn't that big of a deal, right? But say as you get into more responsibilities when you're in middle school, remembering to wash my clothes and or mostly clean my room and things like that. Say I would be told oh, you need to have your room clean when I get home, and I would try to clean my room, but I would get distracted by something else, and I could spend 7 hours trying to clean my room but continuously get distracted, and then I'd get yelled at for it, and then I'd feel shame around it, why can't I just do this? Everybody keeps telling me I just need to try harder, I'm lazy, I just need to do this, but then it's no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't help it. And so in my head, I was something's wrong with me, because everybody's telling me just to try harder, but I'm trying my hardest and I can't keep up. I can't do what everybody else expects me to do. And other people seem to have it just fine. They seem like they can do it. So why can't I do it? What's wrong with me? And then, whenever I would kind of question it and ask, then it's I would get shut down. Nothing's wrong with you. You're just like everybody else. Which that's it's weird, it's complicated, because the same people who told me this also I suspect to be neurodivergent themselves. But there's a theme of many people who have neurodivergent parents, because it is a genetic thing, so most likely one of your parents has some type of neurodivergence if you have it, right? But then say they grew up always being told that they just needed to try harder, so they pushed that onto you, not realizing that their brain functions differently. Oh, that's a car, not a lawnmower. Okay. So they don't realize that their brain functions differently, and they're repeating things that they've been told. But it doesn't really work, because when your brain works differently, it works differently. You need to do things differently if your brain works differently, But not knowing that, they push onto you what they were told, and they're struggling too. But then, how do I explain this? it's like, basically it's just like, well, I'm drowning too, you're gonna drown with me, because that's all I know how to do. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. But then it was weird because it's like, in my case, it's like they actually couldn't keep up with things either. Now that I think about it, it's like they couldn't keep a room clean. How was I supposed to keep a room clean? But it's like these expectations are so high for me. But anyway, that's complicated. I still don't know how to edit, so that's just gonna stay in there. I branched that off in a direction that I didn't really want to go, so I'm gonna double back a little bit. Rewind, I guess. So I had shame around like not being able to do things that other people could. I'd say like my siblings. My sister, she could always do those things. I couldn't keep up with those same things. They would ask me like to thaw chicken, you know, so that like when my parents got home that they could cook food. And then they would come home and the chicken wouldn't be thawed and I would get yelled at, and I would feel so bad because like, well, now we can't have chicken for dinner, and I genuinely meant to do that. Like I could have been downstairs, they could have called me, asked me to thaw the chicken. I walked upstairs to go thaw the chicken and then completely forgot what I was even upstairs for because I got distracted by something else. And then so I just grew up feeling like genuinely like the world would be better off without me. Like I was just a burden because I couldn't do what was expected of me. Like I'm useless, I'm worthless, I can't do anything right. And a lot of that had to do with also my relationship with my parents was not good. It was very cold and critical and judgmental. That's how I would put it. So I did not have very good support. I always grew up with that feeling like I was a burden and like I couldn't ask for much, especially because I was such like a problem child that if I asked for something, it was like, you already can't do this. How are you gonna ask anything of me? So I was also neglected in like the actual definition of neglected, if you know what I mean. And so I didn't have a lot of support. I had such low self-esteem. I didn't like anything about how I was as a person because I was always shown that it was a burden, that if I was able to change, that I wouldn't be a burden. But I couldn't change no matter how hard I tried. And I spent so many years masking and trying to pretend to be somebody else. Like, so my nicknames growing up were Crybaby and Clumsy. I mention that often. Crybaby because I was so sensitive, which has to do with my neurodivergence, right? And Clumsy also has to do with their neurodivergence. I don't have very good like spatial awareness. And so I was constantly bumping into things and dropping things and breaking things. That also made me feel like a burden because I don't mean to break things. I don't mean to inconvenience you, but it felt like everything about the way that I was living, about who I was as a person, was an inconvenience to those around me. And I felt like I was just useless and worthless. Like I couldn't provide anything good. There was nothing, like I had nothing to offer. And so I just continued to hide that away. I tried to study other people and mimic their behavior. And also I was, on top of Crybaby and Clumsy, I was also called slow because it would take me a little bit to pick up on jokes. Like I didn't take hints. I still don't now. Like I really don't like, I much prefer direct communication. I didn't take hints very well. And there were some, I just knew that there were things that other people got that always took me a little bit longer to get. And I hated being called slow because I was like, I'm not stupid. Because they would call me stupid, clumsy, and say that I was emotional. And like, those are all bad things and you can't be those things. But like I said, I tried not to be those things, but it was like, no matter how hard I tried, it's like those things stayed with me. And so that lasted up until, really that didn't change too much for me until I moved out of my family home. And so I also, one thing that I will say, like, is the pretty privilege, you know, because I also learned early on, like about middle school, I learned that if I knew how to do makeup and hair well, and if I just tried to talk less, that I could at least fit in enough at school. I do remember school being a little bit difficult for me with like the noise, and it would be little things. Like I remember somebody tapping their pencil and I was like in during one of our tests, and that's all I could focus on, and I could not focus on my test, and it filling me with like rage. And I was usually good at keeping the rage hidden, but what I couldn't do was like, if I needed to cry, I would cry. And I don't know how many times I cried in elementary school because it kind of just became like frequent, and to the point that it was just like normal. And so they didn't really say or do anything about it. I didn't have accommodations growing up, right? Like, since I was one of those neurodivergent kids that didn't struggle academically, like I could only pay attention for maybe like they'd switch lessons, like say the math lesson for an hour, English for an hour, and then something else for another hour. And I could probably not hold my focus that whole time, but I could hold my focus enough that I understood the concept, and I was able to still like pass my classes and everything. And they noticed that I had a hard time paying attention in class, and that sometimes I would get distracted, and like I also would miss instructions sometimes, and they would tell us not to talk, but I had to talk because I had to ask somebody next to me what we were supposed to be doing because I missed the instructions. And then, I hated when the teachers would, be like, oh, well, if only you were paying attention. Like, girl, I was trying to pay attention, but I couldn't even hear what you were saying. I knew you were giving me instructions, but I didn't understand the instructions, and I didn't recognize the words that you were saying, even though I could hear them. And come to know that that's probably part of auditory processing disorder. And I realized that that's part of why I prefer subtitles now, and why I never enjoyed movies, because I enjoy movies, but I could never follow along because I didn't know what they were saying. It wasn't a problem with volume, it was a problem with recognizing what I was hearing. So I was like, so all of these issues, right? You can imagine how that contributed to my learning, and like my brain had to work extra hard, but I wasn't given the accommodation, I wasn't given the time. I remember when the teacher would try to would teach you something, and then they'd ask if everybody understood, and then everybody would say yeah, and I didn't want to be that one person to say that I didn't understand, or that I need a little bit of time. Or if I did, it'd be like, well, we already did another one and everybody else is good, so we're just going to move on. And then I would get frustrated and I would cry because I was not ready for the next step, and I didn't understand, and I knew that I was just going to fall behind more. And it's things like that where it was just like, I wish it was seen sooner, because if I was properly accommodated, I always wonder, like, I think about what could have been, and it's like grieving a life that I could have had. Okay, so now we're gonna flash forward to me getting diagnosed and how I started working through the shame. So yeah, when I was 20, I had moved out. That's a whole different situation, but I'm just gonna focus on the fact that I moved out, and I realized that all this time I could have been getting therapy through my insurance. Once I turned 18, I could have gone by myself without my mom or my dad or my parents, my parents' permission. Like, since I was legally an adult at 18 and I still had insurance, that whole time I could have gone and gotten therapy like I had been asking since I was like 13, right? So I wasn't aware of this until I was 20, and the only reason why I still had state insurance until I was 20 is because of COVID. They had extended the deadlines, or whatever you would call it. So I was I think supposed to lose that at 18 or 19 or something. Maybe it had to do with whether or not I was still at my parents' residence. But anyway, I went and I looked up a therapist by myself, and I started therapy, and I got diagnosed within my first couple months of therapy, I believe. And the funny thing is that whenever we did the testing, I tested as if I didn't have ADHD, not because I didn't have it, but because the way she explained it to me is that most results for people with ADHD, they'll test within a bell curve, and then that's what they show as like significant of having ADHD, if you test within that bell curve. But there are a few people with ADHD who will test outside of it. It's not as common, but it happens sometimes, and I happen to be one of those people. So when she diagnosed me for my ADHD, we did multiple testing too, like it wasn't just that, but she diagnosed me mostly based on my symptoms, because aside from like the way that I performed on the tests, like I have like textbook symptoms of ADHD, right? So that was that. And whenever she told me I had ADHD, I was just like I said, I felt so validated. Like, I'm not crazy, I'm not lazy, my brain literally functions differently, and that's why I am the way that I am. And so I felt like I was able to properly accommodate myself. I felt like that gave me permission to live my life differently than I had been, because for the longest time I was still trying to fit the mold that everybody else told me to. I was trying to live my life as a neurotypical person would, even though I don't have a neurotypical brain. And so in that way, I was like just fighting myself. Like it didn't make any sense. Like, you can't fit a mold that you're not made for, right? And so once I could finally tell myself, like, it's not that you need to try harder to fit the mold, it's that you won't ever fit the mold, then there was relief in it. Like, okay, that means that it's nothing wrong with me, you know? It's that it's not a lack of effort on my part. My struggles are not because I didn't put in enough effort. It's not, I couldn't have tried harder and gotten out of my struggles. Like, my struggles were gonna stay with me every step of the way. It wasn't my fault. But then it also was hard to come to terms with, like, wait, like, this is something I'll always have. Like, I've always had it. I never had it accommodated, and I always will have it. It's not something I can get rid of, because all of the struggles that I experienced with this, now I know that I can accommodate them, but I can't avoid them. Like, they're never just gonna go away. They're always going to need to be, like I said, accommodated. And at first that was hard. And I felt like, I remember feeling like a freak. It was so bittersweet, you know? And at this time, I also was still masking very heavily. So I was scared that, like, I wasn't gonna find anybody that understood. And I just was like, man, like, these people, they don't even know the real me, because I've been pretending to be somebody else this whole time. Like, at the time, I had just, before I got diagnosed with ADHD, I started the process of unmasking maybe 6 months before that, without knowing that I had it. I suspected it for like probably 10 years before it was actually diagnosed, but I didn't know that I actually had it. But what I did recognize in myself is that I was pretending to be somebody else and holding a lot of myself back whenever it came to the people around me, like when I was at work, but mostly in the relationship that I was in. I noticed that if I did something a little bit off, something that he didn't really like, he would judge me for it. And I didn't like that. I was just like, so because I was constantly hiding myself away, I noticed that I was getting really drained around him. And I was like, I don't like that he, like basically I was like, whenever I show how I really am, he doesn't like that. And I got so tired of it. I realized that I couldn't do it anymore. And I was with him for almost 2 years at that point too. And as I started to unmask, I realized that I liked myself. Even if I was scared that other people around me wouldn't accept me as I showed my real self, I knew that I liked myself. And so I made the decision to end the relationship, and I had the idea that anybody else who was worth staying in my life, like if I were to unmask and the people in my life left, I was just gonna have to be okay with that, because I'd rather be myself and have people like me than continue to be the fake person that they liked, because I was so unhappy with that. I was so depressed and anxious at this point in my life too, not realizing how much of that depression and anxiety was from low self-esteem, and my autism symptoms also. Like, just low self-esteem connected to a lot of my neurodivergence, right? So much shame around being clumsy, around being emotional, around being so talkative. You know, I would be called annoying, and all of that can, you know, because whenever you are neurodivergent, it affects you in every aspect of your life. Like, I know some people would be like, oh, all you ever talk about is autism. Luckily, I don't get a lot of that, because people know me for that. So they expect me to talk about autism and ADHD and neurodivergence, right? But it's like, I see other people comment on other people who make neurodivergent content, and they'll be like, why is this like all that you talk about? Why are you so obsessed with it? It's like, this is so core to my experience. Like, I'm sharing my experience. How I can't talk about my life experience without talking about my neurodivergence and how that has affected every aspect of my life. And so anyway, a little bit off track there. What was I saying? So Yeah, the unmasking. I was like, I'm just gonna be who I want to be who I am, like who I always knew myself to be. Because it's like, I used to feel like I didn't know myself, but it's because I was always trying to mask, because I was always thinking about what other people expected of me first before I thought of who I was and how I wanted to be. Because in the past, whenever I was the way that I wanted to be and I behaved the way that was natural to me, it would be perceived badly, because I would be told that I said something to offend somebody. I would hear that people thought that I was like mean before they got to know me, because I know I also had like really bad RBF, and I have a tendency to talk very flat sometimes in a way that can come off passive aggressive. I didn't realize that. I didn't know that there was a lot of negative connotations to certain phrasing, and that it sounded like I was insulting people when I wasn't, when I was just making like regular like observations in my head. It was actually seen as negative and rude and judgmental whenever I spoke it to a lot of people. So there was so much of that type of conflict in my life, social conflict, because of that. And so that's, what leads you to mask more and more. But it also helps that at this point in my life, I also had been working for a couple years, especially in the serving industry. So I felt like that allowed me to study people a lot more, that and also my interest in human behavior. So I was able to start to pick up on and start to read social situations a little bit better. And so at this point, I actually suspected that maybe I didn't have autism. I knew that I had ADHD and I suspected autism, but I started to stop suspecting autism, because I was like, well, maybe I am just learning now, and maybe it just took me a little bit to learn, but maybe I've learned it and this is just how somebody with ADHD views the world, because you can still have some social struggles with ADHD. It's just different from social struggles that you have when you're autistic. It varies. It's not like, an exact thing. It's a little bit nuanced. So I was like, okay, I think that I'm like doing okay socially, but no. But anyways, backtrack. How I started releasing the shame was I actually started to just behave like myself, behave like the ways that felt natural, and allow myself to be judged. And with having rejective sensitive dysphoria, you know what I'm talking about, rejection sensitivity, it wasn't easy, but I will say that I don't experience that nearly as much as I did in the first 20 years of my life. I don't know. I don't know why that is exactly. Maybe just because I've found more people who are more understanding and accepting, to where it doesn't affect me that deeply. It affects me the most with like in my relationship, but I guess as my relationship has become a lot more just what is stable, and like I'm not worried about, like there's a lot of trust in our relationship, like it's a very stable relationship, then I don't feel like I have as many worries, and we've gotten to know each other in the way that like I know that I'm not really being judged. And it's a little complicated, but basically what helped me start to get through the shame is that I could see that other people appreciated me. Once I really let people see me for who I was, then they were able to appreciate me for who I was. Because how are they going to appreciate me for who I was if I never showed them who I was, and I was always pretending to be somebody else because I had a mask on? Now it's getting kind of dark, but I don't really have good lighting, so it's just going to be dark the rest of the video. Oops. And so I met my partner. I can't remember if I knew him during the diagnosis or anything, but not soon after my diagnosis, I met the partner that I have now. And I told myself that I wasn't going to scare off the right person, right? I'm going to summarize this. I talk about this a lot, but this is like a big factor in my story, so that's why I talk about it. He saw all of the ugly, and he stuck around. It didn't matter how many meltdowns I had, how many ugly tears I shed, how much I spoke and how much I tripped over my words, and how clumsy I was, and all of my little quirks and awkwardness. He would basically, every time I would show any of that, he's just like I remember telling him one time, I was like, we were eating dinner, and I was like, I kind of want to sit like this, and I showed him, and I was like, but I know that's weird, so I'm just gonna sit like this. And then I changed from like sitting with my knees up to my chest to like like sitting the way that a normal person does at the table with my feet down and my feet on the floor. And then he was like, why don't you just sit like that if you're comfortable that way? And I was like, you know what? You're right. And so imagine that, but in other instances where I would explain to him, like, this is how I want to be, but this is how I've been doing things, because I know that that's how it's socially acceptable. And he just continued to encourage me to do things the way that I wanted to do them. And like I said, no matter how much I unmasked, no matter how ugly things looked, and you know, how intense things were, because I also thought that I was just always going to be too much for people because of how emotional I was. No matter how emotional I was, he stuck with me. He was always patient with me. And I was just like, because I had never experienced that with anybody. I didn't know that I could be accepted and loved for everything that I was, especially things that I was ashamed of. And so recognizing that, like seeing that, helped me realize, like, I also didn't have to be alone in it. Like, I started to accept myself better. And through seeing the way that he accepted and embraced me, I was able to accept and embrace myself. Now, that's not to say that that's the only way to do it, right? Like, I already at this point was on a self-love journey of embracing all of the things about myself that I couldn't change. But having him in my life also helped me, because I was able to see that other people could appreciate it too. And so I don't want you, like I said, I don't want people to think like, oh, you need like a romantic partner to help you through this. Like, you don't. You can have such good friends. But anyway, another thing I learned that helped with the shame is that, what am I trying to say? Is that you can't scare off the right people. Not just romantic partners, but actual friends. You need to find neurodivergent people if you're neurodivergent most of the time. If not, you're probably going to gravitate more towards neurotypical people who are around a lot of neurodivergent people, who like have a neurodivergent partner or other neurodivergent family, even if they're neurotypical, right? Because they are just naturally going to be more understanding of you. You're naturally going to be more compatible. And so, because in my life now, so I still have a lot of, I still talk to a few of my friends that I had before I met him. And I do suspect that honestly, all of us are neurodivergent, because we've all talked about it at one point, and it just makes a lot of sense as to why we're still friends to this day. And my partner, like friends that I met through him, they also happen to be a little bit more like, they might not be diagnosed, you know, anything, but they're not the most neurotypical people that you'll meet, right? And with them, I've noticed that at first when I met them, I was still masking a little bit, because it takes a lot of time to unmask and recognize how deep those layers go. But I realized that the more I expressed who I was, the more that I could get more input from them, like they could really see me and interact with me as I am. And they would tell me like that they appreciate the way that I am. And I'm just like, wow, like, it's so good to hear that people don't mind that I get a little bit carried away when I speak sometimes, that sometimes I, you know, like will stutter and slur my words, and, you know, I can be a little bit scatterbrained. They don't mind that, because they have shown me like other ways that I have strengths. For example, like if somebody's going through something emotional, they know that they can talk to me and come to me for advice, and that I'm going to be honest with them, and I'm also going to be supportive of them and encourage them to just like show their emotions. Like, I'm never going to shame you for your emotions. You can talk to me about your problems, and I'll do my best to give advice and be there for you in the way that you need. And I realize that that's not something that a lot of people have. Like, I have a lot more empathy and understanding because also of my life experience. So I can help people by sharing. I can help give advice because I have so much life experience in that way. Does that make sense? And I've been able to just see who I am more without the mask, and appreciate myself more, and see the way that others appreciate me for being me. And so, yeah, like that helped a lot with the shame. I hope that's not exactly the way that I wanted to explain it, but that's the way that my brain's coming up with it now. And then, so my autism diagnosis was not even like a couple months ago yet, I think. Maybe it was a couple months ago. I don't have a very good sense of time. I think it was about a couple months ago. And with that, I was able to let go of shame that I didn't even know I had but that shame was different because it had to do with, yes, like the social aspect, where I had a lot of shame in the way that I performed in social, social gatherings and stuff like that, right? Now that I had actually an explanation, I stopped judging myself as much, because I'm like, it's not my fault. It's not my fault that I missed social cues. It's not like I had bad intentions. It's that I don't pick up on those as naturally. You know, I used to hold a lot of shame around accidentally hurting other people's feelings because of my lack of social awareness. But now I can see that I can't control that. You know, even if I was aware, there's still a chance that they could have still perceived it in a way that hurt their feelings too. And that's just how things are sometimes. I've tried to not dwell on things that I can't change, you know? I wish I could explain that a little bit more in depth, but I don't know. If you have more questions on it and you want me to get more details into that, then maybe it'll help if I have like specific questions that you want me to elaborate on, you know? So you can comment if you want. And actually, yeah, and also the diagnosis helped me let go of the shame I had around my work performance, right? Because I was constantly burning out. No matter what job I was working, like I switched from a server job, which is a very socially interactive job, to something not very social, like a vape shop job, you know, where I'm not having super long interactions with so many people. And that helped a lot. But over time, I was still constantly getting burnt out from jobs and trying to switch jobs and lower my hours as much as I could. And I'm like, why am I like this? Why is it that when I'm working, I can't do anything else? When I'm working, I come home and my brain is just wired and all I can do is think, and I can't relax, and I can't keep my house clean because I don't have the energy. And then I start to get depressed and I lose the will to live, and like I'm constantly anxious. Like, why am I like this, right? And I was doing my best to focus on and prioritize my mental health. I was going to therapy. I took a year off because I had an insurance gap at that point, but once I had my other job, I was able to get insurance again, and I went back to therapy. And you know, she's like, you've improved so much in all these ways. Like my anxiety symptoms, my depressive symptoms, and my complex PTSD symptoms, they had all decreased. And I felt like I was actually doing so much better than I had been, but I kept on struggling with the same thing, which was managing work. And then there came a point where we had a session where I talked about how much the noise would overstimulate me and how much I did not like interacting with people, even though it wasn't that much interaction. I just had such a hard time interacting with people and dealing with the noise in the store because I was working in retail, right? I was like, the sound of the walkie-talkies and the sound of people talking in the store, like all these different voices and everything, and you know, the music coming from the intercom, and then you know, me focusing on trying to, because I used to shop for people, like, and so I'm like looking at my device and then finding this stuff on the shelf and then putting it in my cart, and then sometimes customers would ask you for help, so you had to stop and help them, but then you were also timed, and like I would get so overstimulated. And I talked to other people, and like most of the people who worked in my area, they liked it. They didn't mind it. They felt like it was the least social interaction. It was like that they could do it mindlessly, but I couldn't. I could never filter out all the noise that I was hearing. I couldn't filter out everything I was seeing. And my brain would get stressed out by looking through the shelves constantly because there can be so many items that are so similar, and they tell you where it is on there, but sometimes it doesn't match up. Like there's like a number sequence, and sometimes it does not match up, and so that's more brain power of like your eyes filtering through. And then on top of that, like the sound of the cart when you're pushing the cart. And I guess when I started to explain that to my therapist more, then she was like, and then within the next few sessions, that was maybe just the next couple sessions after that, then I guess things just added up more, and she was like, you know, we can probably get you assessed for autism. And I was like, because we hadn't talked about autism ever since my ADHD diagnosis. So like about even the suspicion of having it. And so once I got my autism diagnosis, that validated all of my work struggles. But it was also, and I've made a lot of TikTok videos over this. So once I get to 10K, I really want to, I'm excited to like have things organized into a playlist so that the people who find me from my neurodivergent content can, you know, like go through that playlist. But I explained like, so I got my autism diagnosis, and I was further validated, right? Because I had been following a lot of women on TikTok who have ADHD and who have autism and who have both, who have audhd, right? And I felt like I related a lot to them, but I never felt like I knew enough to know whether or not I had both. And I know a lot of people don't even care to know, but I felt like I needed to know. And when I did, it felt like that also gave, the same way that my ADHD diagnosis gave me permission to like live my life differently and like accept myself, my autism diagnosis also did the same thing for me. Wow, it's like really dark, but I really don't want to get up. So sorry. Not sorry. And so yes, it was validating, like, yeah, all of my social struggles and my sensory sensitivities and everything, all of that makes sense with autism and the way that I get burnout so easily. And I held a lot of shame around not being able to work as much as other people did, because people would say, well, I just push through for the meantime and then I can relax later. I'm like, no, like my brain doesn't work like that. I can't relax. Like I'm trying to tell you, like I work, even if I'm only working 25 hours a week, I cannot relax and feel and enjoy my life. And I genuinely lose the will to live when I'm working because it's stressing me out that bad. Like I come home and all I can think about is every little interaction I had at work. Like I don't know how to explain to you that like I can't, like, and it made me feel so inadequate. But then learning that I had autism confirmed that my brain literally functions differently. That once again, with the ADHD diagnosis, it's not something that you can just work harder to overcome. It's something that you can understand and accommodate so that it's not as stressful, but it's not something that will go away with effort. It's not something that stays due to lack of effort either. You know what I'm trying to say? And so that's also what helped me the most in releasing the shame is recognizing, I think, the scientific aspects of how autism and ADHD affect your brain and how that literally makes a lot of other things more of a struggle. And how that's not something to be ashamed of, because it's not that you can do anything about it. It's just that your brain is different and it works differently. It's like, it's basically, I added so much logic to it from the scientific research about neurodivergence that I kind of had to use the logic to cancel out the shame, because I felt like that made it make sense. That my struggles were not something to be ashamed of. It's just that somebody with ADHD is bound to have issues in performance if they're trying to perform like a neurotypical person, because of the ways that your brain literally is affected by the neurodivergence. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So yeah, I think I did a decent job of somehow staying somewhat on track, because like I said, I'm just trying to talk about my experience with shame and neurodivergence and ways that I've kind of worked through that. So yeah, now, oh, and also, sometimes it's still weird to think about the fact that autism is a disability and that I'm legally like disabled, right? But I don't want to see that as like a bad thing. It's that if our system worked differently, then there wouldn't be any shame around it. In fact, I feel like it's, our system does not actually work very well for even neurotypical people. So you can only imagine that it's even worse when you're not neurotypical. When it comes down to the science and biology of what a human body needs to be at its most like optimal, healthiest state, the exercise, the food, and the nutrients, all of the work that you have to do to give your body the exercise that it needs, the nutrients that it needs, to like plan and cook healthy meals and take the time to do all that and to give your body the rest that it needs and all these things to like function well, it's actually very difficult to do in the type of society that functions the way that ours does with 40-hour work weeks, right? So when I consider all of that, it helps me realize that I'm not a problem. Like, it's our system is just not very good, you know? And so I've embraced that I will do best by taking an unconventional route where I set my own hours and I make my own money with like my own type of business if I wanted to, or something like that, you know? It's that the typical 9 to 5 where I'm interacting with people like face to face like that is not the way for me. And so I've really been listening and to myself, listening to my body and what it needs, you know, when it needs rest, and trying to find a way that fits me. So I really like doing content creation because it's a way for me to interact with people and express myself without the social pressures of like, and how do I say this? Like, without the stress of socializing directly with people, but I still get that sense of community. And like, I'm like, oh, I'm getting like a little bit emotional because like, I'm really glad that my content is starting to reach people, like seeing so many comments of people saying like, wow, like you basically just read my thoughts. Like I relate to so much of this. I thought I was the only one. That's my goal, is to show you that like, you're not alone. There's so many people just like this. And I'm glad that this is a way that I'm able to share it. So yeah, let me know if you have anything to, I know this was a really long one. I didn't know I was going to talk about it for this long. And in the future, I really want to work on my thumbnails. I want to get subtitles in my videos, but right now I'm still working on how how do I explain this? I'm working up to it. Work in progress. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions or anything, and I hope you got something useful out of this. My tea is still warm, surprisingly. Thanks for watching. Bye.